Hi, everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a Latinx writers podcast. I'm your host, Ruben Mendive. And today we have a brand new guest here brought to you by a virtual room. And I'm so excited to have them on. I start every interview by having my guests introduce themselves. So, your name and how you identify for the people at home.
Oh, hi, I'm Marcos Gonzalez. I'm a little stinker. I don't, I don't know. I'm a weirdo. I'm a self-identified weirdo. I'm very odd. I like obscure things. And I'm Puerto Rican.
Perfect. And so, my follow up question is always, where are you from? So, when people ask you, where are you from? What do you say?
I answered it quick. I'm Puerto Rican. Both my parents are Puerto Rican. My dad is actually Native Islander, mostly Native Islander, and my mom is like 4 or 5 generations Puerto Rican, but I think originally from Spain. And yeah, I was raised in Orlando, Florida, which is a very odd place to grow up. It's not the greatest.
So, I'm curious because think I've been to Orlando once to go to like Disney World. So how would you describe Orlando to someone who's never been there?
Oh God, I mean, a terrible swampy mess. I think I have a theory. Like I understand why, like especially like there's a large contingent of like Puerto Rican Cuban people. It is the climate and all that's very similar. It's like island climate. It's very like humid, warm year round, and there is a huge pocket of Latinos there, and that's great. But Orlando specifically is pretty much completely owned by Disney. Like everything is Disney owned, and there's just a lot of weird stuff there. Like my brother at like an early age was asked to be a Disney kidcaster, which is like the radio DJ thing. They like interview people as kids. And there was like this town. This is like the story I tell everybody of how like crazy Orlando is because it's so weird. There's a town in Florida called Celebration, which already is like pretty weird, and it's owned by Disney. And you can only live there if if you're like somehow embedded in like the Disney world or the Disney family, and you're pretty much like asked to live there. And everything is like the same house but different pastel colors with white picket fences. It's a nightmare. And they used to have, I don't think they do this anymore, but when we were growing up, they used to have like secret concerts in their like little like main drag area, and it was like specifically Disney Channel stars, but nobody outside of the town would know that these people were here. So like the Jonas Brothers, when they were like doing their show, performed here. Like Hannah Montana performed here. Like Drew Seeley, who I think was like the guy that did the voice for Zac Efron for High School Musical, like was trying to have a career at one point, like musically, and they put him there. It's very, very, very bizarre. I don't know how to explain it. But yeah, it is like it's pretty much just a giant swamp that Walt Disney decided to build things on.
And I'm always curious about like people's parents' story. So like what's
Yeah.
your parents' story? Like what brought them to Florida? Like what do they do for a living?
Yeah, so how my mom got here was very odd. So she's the youngest of 5 siblings, and essentially what ended up happening was when she was in her teens, like early high school, like middle school type situation, my grandpa got really sick, and he got Alzheimer's at like a wildly young age. It was like mid 40s to late 40s, and in Puerto Rico at the time, there was no real like studies or anything being done, and so it was kind of like a uh-oh kind of situation. But luckily in Tampa, Florida, there was I think it was at USF. Some of the details are a little muddy. It's been a long time since I heard this story, but they went to Tampa, and there was a laboratory at USF that was sort of had experimental treatment for it. So they sort of just packed up and went there. Meanwhile, my dad's family were actually in Puerto Rico, moved to New York for like a hot sec because they used to own a taco maker in Puerto Rico, but it kept getting robbed. So they were like, all right, we need to get out of here. So they went to New York for a while and then eventually made their way down to Florida. And my dad actually joined the military after high school. And my parents met somewhere in that intermediary period between high school and my dad going into the military, and then high school, my mom going into getting her bachelor's or her, what is it? The 2 years associate's degree? Yeah. Associate's degree. And then my mom got a sick job at Orlando, so she left Tampa, where this is where most of my family lives. And then my dad's family happened to be in Orlando, so they raised us in Orlando.
And like, what's your relationship to like the island, the homeland? Like, have you been? Like, what's it like?
Yeah. So Puerto Rico, we used to go a ton when I was younger, like 3 or 4 times a year, and then eventually it sort of scaled back to like around Christmas time. We would go between Christmas and Dia de los Reyes, because it was like, it's obviously like crazy parties in Puerto Rico, like nonstop every day. And so my mom would sort of take that time off, and we'd all go. And I mean, we always had family there, and also like weird exterior family where it was like they're not necessarily family, but my mom grew up with them, so they're all tios and tias anyway. So we would all go hang with them, and I don't know, eat and drink a bunch of cocorico. That was like my big thing for some reason. When I was little, I was obsessed with cocorico. But no, we would go all the time, and my dad's family was in Rio Piedras, so we'd go there for most of it, and then every once in a while we'd take every other trip. We'd usually go to Yunque for a little bit, just because apparently I was really obsessed with it as a little kid, and I still kind of am because I write about it a lot. But it was it's I don't know, it's one of those places where anytime anybody's ever like, I want to go on vacation, or I want to go somewhere cool, I immediately recommend it because I love it. It's just a place that I like constantly. When I have the money and can afford it, I will go. And I think I went like 2 or 3 times in college just to bring friends to like introduce them to the culture and like take them to like old San Juan and like be like, guys, this is what my life was like. All these like piragua stands and like bacalaos and all this stuff that's like strewn throughout the streets. Like, this is me.
And so, like, how would you describe your household growing up? Like, what were you like? What were your parents doing?
Yeah. So originally my mom was a graphic designer for the Orlando Sentinel, which is the, the newspaper up in Orlando. And then once we all started getting of age to like going to school, she did this really sneaky thing where she just became the secretary at every school we were ever at. So she would know our grades and know how we were doing every day instead of just waiting for the grades. Cause that's just how she is, I guess. It was like ultra helicopter mom. And then my dad originally, so he left the military like when I was really little, so I don't really remember at what point. But then he went over to this company called like Pfizer, which I think made like military software. It was like a really boring place. I remember going to the office when I was younger, being like, "This is terrible." And he did that for a while, and then he switched over as like he was like a general manager to like banks, or not general manager, like location manager. What is it? I don't remember what it is, but essentially the manager of a specific location of a bank was his
Oh,
job.
branch.
Branch manager. Yeah, dude. This is like going into my past so far. He did that, and then eventually became like the branch manager or the vice branch manager of the downtown Orlando Banco Popular, which is very, very cool. And then that was kind of what they did professionally. Very interesting, tumultuous childhood. I'm the middle child. My brother's 2.5 years older, and my sister's 2.5 years younger. My brother, obviously, we were raised super strictly Catholic. Like, my dad had us like at a very young age, like had to read in Spanish at the Spanish church that we went to every Sunday. It was like a weird, like hardcore thing that was like almost sort of uncomfortable at how intense it was. It felt like a boot camp, and like, you have to do this every Sunday, which stressed us out. And I had like a very, I don't know if it was like the military background or what. My dad was very intense. So much so that eventually when my brother graduated high school, my parents got divorced, and I had to sort of deal with that whole fallout. And my dad was, I don't know how far I can go into the story. It's pretty wild, but to keep it brief, my dad was very like verbally, physically abusive man. And I don't know where necessarily that came from. We don't know if it was like his side of the family. They're like very like, they were very in the shadows. We don't really know much about them. They were very odd, but he was just a really interesting person. And eventually through high school, I ended up having to get like a restraining order against him. It was very, very complicated. And my mom at the same time was like going through a crisis because she had us all like, my brother at like 19, 20, me at like 21, 22, very, very, very young.
Yeah.
And we all knew it was like, there was no way this was planned. So we all, from a very early age, we were like, okay, we were accidents. We get it. And I think when they divorced, there was a sort of a fallout there of like, what do we do now? And so my childhood got really, really complicated in high school because my sister ended up living with my grandma. My brother was in college at Brown, and I ended up living with my girlfriend from high school because there wasn't enough space anywhere else. And I wanted to continue doing sort of like a speech and debate, which is what sort of got me into acting and writing. And so I ended up moving down to Fort Lauderdale for my senior year and living with my girlfriend at the time and her family, which they were super nice to take me in, and sort of like bounced around from friends' couches here and there before I moved in with them officially. So it was a very odd childhood, but it definitely like made me very like self-aware early and like self-sufficient early as well. Like a lot of like, okay, I understand I have to hustle because like, you know, as soon as the net is pulled out from under you, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm free falling until I figure this out, you know. So very very stressful towards the end of high school. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like I mean everybody says this when they go through like traumatic events, but I do feel like I'm better for it. I feel like I learned the hard way, unfortunately, but I did learn a lot from that experience.
Yeah. And, speaking of high school, I'm always curious about people during that time.
Yeah.
And I always frame this like part in three questions. So, who were you at that time? Who were you pretending to be? And how do you think other people saw you?
Oh man, who I was and who I was pretending to be are gonna overlap a lot here. So this is gonna sound like I had the most traumatic childhood, and I swear to God, it was bad, but it wasn't like the worst thing in the world. But my between like eighth and ninth grade, I was an athlete my entire life. I was a swimmer, I played soccer, and I played basketball. I always did those three, and I was like always pretty good at them. And I like played AAU basketball, and I like swam on like varsity when I was in the eighth grade. Like I did a lot of stuff that was like, oh, cool, because my mom kind of just pushed it, and also because my brother was super unathletic. Sorry, Gabe. And my sister just did it. She's more of a diva vibe. Sorry, Sophia. But they know that was their vibe. So they were never going to be the athletes. And my mom was like really into sports, and so was my dad. So I did those. And around eighth or ninth grade, I developed a thyroid issue that is called, and here's the craziest, it's the craziest medical term you'll ever hear, but it's called thyroid storm, where my body started producing like an insane amount of hormone. So like imagine puberty, but like times like 20. Like I was like sweating every day, like freaking like falling apart, bro. I had to bring changes of shirts to school because I would sweat through them. I was like, bro, I think I'm like dying. And my mom was like, nah, you're fine. But nobody knew because like I was normal otherwise. I just had like crazy, I think I was getting like really bad acne. I was like growing all of a sudden, like I grew like a foot, like an insane amount of height. And so finally they took me to like this thyroid specialist, and he was like, he has thyroid storm. This can develop into thyroid cancer. It's a big issue. Basically, what we'll do is either like use radioactive iodine, which sounds nuts, to get rid of it, or just remove it. So in ninth grade, I had my thyroid removed, which was a pretty painless procedure, but I wasn't allowed to like really partake in sports for like a short period of time. But my mom was like, never again. So she was like, never again. I don't trust it. My heart was, it was a real big mess. And so essentially what happened was my brother was big into theater and speech and debate, and theater like just gave me the worst nerves ever. I could never like get on stage. I loved it. I loved watching it. I thought it was cool, but I could just never learn a part and like feel comfortable. Whereas like speech and debate, I like didn't really understand what it was, because it wasn't, there's two parts. There's the debate side, which is exactly what you think it is. It's just like people going at it about crazy problems going on in the world and politics and all that. With the speech side, the speech had a bunch of different categories. And so there was like oratory, which is your traditional speech, which is like take a topic and just go off about it for like 10 minutes. And there's a structure and all that. But then there was also these things called like humorous interpretation, duo interpretation, and dramatic interpretation. And so in these events, they were particularly like almost like competitive acting, where you have to perform between 8 to 10 and a half minutes. And whatever the performance is can be anything from like a movie script, anything, as long as it had an ISBN, a book, a script, a poem, whatever. And you basically had to take this source material and like synthesize it down to a 10-minute performance, which was really bizarre. And I had to learn, and it was hard. And I hated reading books, so it was even more hard. I had really bad ADD and a learning disability when I was growing up. So like the extent of my reading was comic books. So it was very, very difficult to get into this. And on top of that, my nerves about performing. And when you do go to competitions for these things, you perform like 6 times, which is preliminary round. So you do it 6 times, and then you get judged based on that. And then if you do well, you move on to the next round. And so on, so on. So like at the end of this competition, you could have been performing 10 times. So I was like, yo, this is terrible. I'm too nervous. But my mom and my brother were like, this is the best way to get rid of your like stage fright or whatever. And they were so right. And I did that for God knows how long. So to go back to these questions, I thought I was the cool jock athlete. I thought that was what it was going to be, but I was never that. I think that everybody was like, he's not that. I assumed I would be that. And then very quickly I started to realize, oh, I'm sort of this like, I would say that this comes back to like I was sort of the wild card. Like I bounced around from friend groups. I liked the film club, and I liked watching theater, and I had friends in theater and the film club and speech and debate. And I did have friends who were athletes, but I was not an athlete. So I think I was like a free agent type situation where like I didn't really fall into your like stereotypical category of what someone in high school was. And I don't even think I realized that until like the very end of high school, where I was like, oh, I'm all over the place. but I did go through my like phases of high school where I would think about the tropes and be like, am I a jock? Am I a nerd? Am I this? Am I that? All the time. And I'd be like, these kids hang out all the time. Does that mean I'm not part of their crew? You know? So there was a lot of self-discovery in high school.
And so, what'd you do after high school? Like, did you have a plan? Did things go
Yeah.
according to plan?
Oh man. So because I switched high school senior year, there was a lot of like, crap. Like I had to like reestablish myself out of high school, make a bunch of friends again. It was really, really stressful. I will say speech and debate started to go really well. My brother was like won a bunch of different tournaments, and so I never really compared I tried not to compare myself to him, but obviously I wanted to do better than him. So I was constantly like, yo, I gotta win things. And I won Florida state champion like 3 times, which was really cool. And I had won like Yale, which is a prestigious tournament, and this one called Glenbrooks in Chicago. And I had a nice like I like definitely lived in a shadow, but I had a nice little speech and debate career, which was cool. And because of speech and debate, I would go every summer to like this summer camp in Boston at Emerson College, which was like sort of intensive, where you'd find the source material that you would use for the year and synthesize it down and make a performance. And then we did this thing called guerrilla performance, where you'd perform in the wild of Boston, like find an area in Boston or in the Common or in the Garden that like looked like something that might fit into your script, and you'd perform with costumes and everything. It was really cool. And because of that, I only really knew, like, I knew of like big schools outside of Florida, but like because of all the moving and like the health issues, I had so many things go on with grades where I was like missing so much school, and like especially with the family situation as well, that like my grades were bad, but my SAT scores were like pretty decent. So I couldn't get into like, I wasn't like my brother smart. My brother was like, uh-oh, like he's a genius. Like we all knew that. So I was like looking at different schools, and I started to apply to like journalism schools, because I didn't really think I would ever be like a performance major. I didn't really have any like plays under my belt. I really enjoyed writing, but like I didn't know if I was honestly really worried about like income and like how I would self-sustain myself if I went into a writing career, not really even knowing what I wanted to write about or where. And I had this like affinity for sports for pretty much my entire life. So I was like, okay, fine. I'm going to go into sports journalism. That sounds like a fun career. And I applied to like every school in Florida. And then I applied to Emerson, and then like DePaul, and like I think one other school, maybe like Syracuse, because I knew they had like pretty good programs. And also like, I knew this, like, I think there was like some tie to speech and debate. I mean, Emerson was where I went to the summer camp, and like they knew the program director. So I kind of just, like, I applied to all these places, but I was pretty much gunning for Emerson. And then when the program director was like, hey, you got in early action, and I was like, sick. I don't care about school no more. Like, I was like, I don't care about high school anymore. Like, whatever. And so when I got to college, I mean, college was like a hard reset, because like, I mean, I had all these friends at my first high school, and that high school was 6th grade to like senior year, but I left junior year, and they all lived in Orlando. So like, I pretty much hit a hard reset for my senior year. And even then I was like, dang, I don't really have a home in Fort Lauderdale, because like by the time I went to college, this girl and I had broken up. So I was like, I'm pretty much hitting the reset button again.
What do you feel like you took away from those years, you know?
I don't know. I went in a journalism major, and I was like, I'm gonna be a journalist. This is what I'm gonna do. And like a year or two in, I remember a teacher like having like a one-on-one combo with me and being like, you don't need a degree to be a journalist. And I was like, yo, what? And at that point, I was going to school on all the student loans that I could get, because my parents were not in the picture and still weren't through all of college. So I was like, dang, this is like too expensive of a school to be just like getting a degree for something I don't need a degree for. And my sophomore year, I started doing like more comedy stuff, because I knew that's what I liked in high school. And I got into this comedy troupe that was like kind of prestigious. And I was like, all right, like I'll start doing this. And they were like, yo, like you're a bad writer, because I didn't have any structured writing experience. And it was like kind of a boot camp. Like I was just like reading their sketches, watching SNL, like pretty much watching anything. It was strictly sketch at first for me. Like I was like, I need to figure out how to write a sketch, because the sketch is like a baby TV show. You know, it's like super tiny, super condensed. Here's the story arc. And I was like, I got to figure this out. And I was like very methodical about it. I read every book I could. I watched every sketch show I could. I watched Laugh-In, like this stuff from the 60s. I watched like In Living Color. I watched all that. I watched SNL. I watched every single sketch show I could. and just started sort of pulling from different things that I knew. Like I wrote a sketch that was pretty popular that was like about a VH1, like you know those like rewinds where it was like, oh, we're gonna look back at like the creation of this music video, stuff like that. I made a sketch like based on that. I made this character called Jorge Ortiz, who was like a Latino news reporter that I kind of based around like Geraldo Rivera and my grandpa, sort of mix them up and like try to like create this like very interesting character and see what would come of it. And I did a lot of weird stuff like that where I would just like go into my to be fair, I was also the only Latinx person on this team. It was like predominantly white. So I was the only one that had like culture, like my own culture specifically to bring into the equation. So I would write a lot of sketches that were like based around my culture and like being Puerto Rican, or like different voices I heard, or things based around like telenovelas my mom used to watch, like Salome, like all this crazy stuff that like I had seen, and like Sábado Gigante, things that I grew up with that like I knew there's no way these people could ever know anything about. And I was like, I'm gonna write about this because it's unique and cool. And I went from like sophomore year being like the worst writer on the troupe to senior year having like most of the show being stuff I had written, which was really cool. Like maybe a third of it, or like a little bit more than that, was like sketches I had written. And so that was really, really cool for me. Like I was really excited about that. And I was like, dang, I've like grown as a writer. And during that time I had gone to like the registrar's office and been like, hey, I want to do writing. This is like between sophomore and junior year. Is it too late to switch? And they were like, yes. And I was like, all right, so what can I do? And they're like, I mean, if you declare a minor, you're really going to have to cram in a lot of classes. But we could do it. And I was like, all right. And they created this thing called like the comedy minor, which is a hilarious thing. I'm technically a journalism major with a comedy minor, but I'll probably never put that on a resume because like people are going to be like, what is this? But because I did that, it let me take classes in like the writing department, and it let me take like writing for the TV pilot and writing like a comedy pilot, stuff that I like really genuinely wanted to learn. And the first couple times, like the first class, I know I was so stupid. They were like, we want you to write a spec, which is like the classic college thing. And I was like, I'm going to pick a comedy that like nobody knows, which is not what you're supposed to do when you write a spec. And nobody told me that. So I went for like this crazy show that was on Comedy Central at the time called like Big Time in Hollywood, Florida, which was like, it was such a small, it was like, I don't know what the budget was because they had like crazy, like Cuba Gooding Jr. was in it for some reason. Like it was so like Ben Stiller was in it. It was like the most random show, but I was obsessed with it. I loved that it took place in Florida because like like Fort Lauderdale is like really close to Hollywood, Florida. And I was like, that's hilarious. I wish I wrote on this show. So I wrote this spec, and of course the show didn't get more than one season. So that was a total waste. I just had this spec of but like nothing I could do with it. And then I think the next class that I did Archer, because I was like, Archer's gonna run forever. And then like I don't know if it like moved networks or what, but like there wasn't much Archer after I'd ran that one. So I was like, dang. So when I applied for the ELA program, which is like in and of itself a crazy thing, like Emerson LA, as I'm talking about it. When I was like hitting senior year, I thought I was fully gonna move to New York because that's where my brother was, and I was like, I just want to be close to family. I'll be comfortable there. And I did this show with my comedy troupe, and someone from like Funny or Die saw it and was like, hey, do you want an internship at Funny or Die? It would be in LA. And I was like, oh God, I didn't apply for the program. So like last minute I applied for the program and got in, and had to like figure out how to get my driver's license, figure out how to get a car, like so much to figure out. But I mean, the rest is history. Like that was like the greatest experience I could have asked for. Like I went to Funny or Die when they were still making sketches. They had an in-house writing team. They had an in-house social team. They had like all these like prolific people that used to write with like Will Ferrell, or like used to write on SNL in like the 90s, 80s, whatever it was. And I just like took it all in, and like it was an unpaid internship, and it was like 2 days, and I was like, yo, I'll do the 5. I don't care. So I was doing 5 days of internship, bouncing between Funny or Die and then Gary Sanchez Productions, which was their their like film department. And then there's like 2 sides. There was like Gary Sanchez and Gloria Sanchez, and that was their like film side. And I was just like reading scripts all the time, being like, dang, this is how TV is supposed to go. This is how movies supposed to go. And I literally at the end of my internship, I was like, how can I get in the writer's room? And they were like, well, to be honest, you should go do Groundlings or UCB or any of that stuff, and then in a couple years get back to us. And I was like, dude, that sounds like a time commitment. I want to get here now. So I went over to the social team because they were all young, and I was like, yo, how did you guys get here? Because all of you are like in your mid-20s. And they were like, Vine. And Vine had died at that point. And like one of the dudes I became really close with, this guy Anthony Trolley, and we were talking, and he was like, honestly, dude, it's just like you got to find that like next wave and just jump on it. And like at the time, Periscope existed, and Facebook Live was like, we're announcing Facebook Live, and they were giving out like, they were doing that shitty thing that Facebook does where they just like give money to people to use their thing so that nobody else uses the other thing. So they were like, we have a better Periscope. Here's a bunch of money, you know? And so I came from a character background, like character performance from a sketch troupe I was in. So I was like, all right, what if I just do these characters on Facebook Live, but in like specific situations? And I pitched them a bunch of ideas. And the one that really, really stuck was Jorge Ortiz. It was this reporter that I did that was like Jordan Kleppery, where it was like, I had this journalism background, so I knew what was going on in politics. And I would talk about like, for example, I think the first one I did was like about gun laws being passed, I think was the first one. And I would go out there and like there was a filibuster going on, and I was like interviewing people on Hollywood Boulevard, and I had my mustache and my hair swooped over, and I was just like asking them questions super fast, like talking sort of like, I don't even know how to explain it, but I was like asking them these questions, and I think the people thought I was like dumb or like not very knowledgeable, so they would just like say whatever they thought. And like a lot of these people were like, at the time I didn't know, were probably Trump supporters, so they were saying like all this like belligerent, ignorant, racist stuff. And then I would catch them in like lies and start to like piece their argument apart, because I knew what what we were talking about, but they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would make them look stupid, but because I was like this character, they didn't know whether to be upset or just laugh. So they would just laugh it off and be like, ha ha ha, like I just gotta walk away. But I would do it for like an hour and a half at a time on Facebook Live. Like I was spending a majority of my afternoon out on the street interviewing people. So like people were just constantly watching because they're like, this is crazy. He's just like walking around interviewing people, and we're all like witnessing it live. And like there was no script. Like I would just take I would have like a topic of the day, like whatever happened that day. Like if there was something going on in Congress or Senate, or if, I think this was all pre-Trump. So like if this was when he was still like, I'm gonna run. So he was doing dumb shit every day. So I was like, oh, this is like, I'll just take some stupid thing he said and see what people think about it. And so I was doing that for like 30 weeks straight. And like after 10 weeks, Funny or Die approached me and was like, do you want to do this here? And I did that for them for like 20 weeks. And it was like once or twice a week for like 20 weeks. And then someone from Funny or Die went to Comedy Central and was like, yo, do you want to do this here? So I just went from like doing it outside my house to doing it at Funny or Die to doing it at Comedy Central. And Comedy Central gave me a show, and we shot like 10 episodes, but I think like only 6 or 7 aired, because then Trump got elected and everybody was like, no more politics. We can't do this. This is like too sad. But it was like my first entrance into like the entertainment world, into writing, because I was writing, acting, and producing my own thing all the way around. And I remember meeting with a manager who is my manager now, and like the first time we met, he was like, this is great, but what else can you do? And I was like, yeah, I guess that is how this works. Like, yeah, I can act and I can write, but I need to show them other things, because I'm not gonna be like, I don't want to be like a one-trick pony. And so that led to like my first short, which was called Illegal Alien, and it was about an extraterrestrial, like literally an alien, who had like crash landed on like the West Coast in the US like in the 80s or 90s, and had been living in the wilderness, and like had found this family and had been living with them, and had decided that like it was time for him to become a citizen. He wanted to like start his own family, be able to get a job, be able to do things that like the traditional American family would be able to do. And it was shot sort of like Vice mockumentary style, and I had like these crazy prosthetics and paint on me, and like we found this house that had like this crazy little sort of like tucked away room that I like lived in. It was a very, very cool experience, and I shot it. It was about a 12 minutes short, and I threw it over to the manager, and he was like, all right, this is pretty good. I was like, cool. And then I signed to them, and then he was like, what's next? So I turned it into a half hour, and that half hour went probably all over town. I met with a bunch of people, like from Lord Miller to like Gina Rodriguez's company. I probably met with like every LatinX company that existed, but I think I was too young and like fresh, and like honestly, it was not a great script. It was just a cool idea that I had that I wrote out, but like definitely needed a lot of work. Man, what question were we on? I just started telling you my whole like, this is where I went, this is how it all happened. But it literally started in high school, and it has not stopped until like, it's still going. It was like, oh, crazy, like a lot of luck, a lot of like hard work, dude. I was like churning out constant scripts and iterations of scripts and ideas. It was just so much like chugging away and chugging away and chugging away that it really feels endless. Like it feels like I haven't really stopped since college.
Yeah. And, I'm always curious about people during those first 2 years in LA. The first 2 years are the hardest years. So like besides the career of it all, like what was it like to just move to like Los Angeles? Like, had you been here before? Did you know what the hell you were doing?
Never. Nope. I didn't know. When I'm telling you, I didn't know a single thing. I didn't know. I'd never been like west farther than like Chicago. Like I just never went out that way. Like, partly because it was expensive, but also I don't know anybody on this side of the states, and it was like that was a huge stressful part for me because I was like, damn, I don't have like a pocket of family that I can go to if I'm in dire straits, like if I'm really like sad about something or depressed about something or if things are going well. So that took me a really long time to get used to. My first foray into this was like the Emerson LA program, and like luckily it was with like a bunch of kids from Boston. So like I knew a bunch, like there was like 100 something of us in this building. So like I knew all these kids and we were all homies. And it was like pretty cool. It was like, oh dang, like I have all these friends here. So like it didn't feel too different because it just felt like, oh, we're like, it's still Boston, but now we have cars. Really is what it felt like. It was like, now everybody's got cars. And some of the kids that went to school from Boston happened to be from LA. So like I got to meet a lot of these people's parents, and like they made it really comfortable. And I was dating a girl here that lived in Burbank. So like I got to know that area well. So I was like relatively comfortable. It was just so much added expenses of like car insurance, like food, gas, like all the stuff I never thought about, just like all got thrown on me. And like when you're running an unpaid internship, it's not it's not chill. So I was super stressed out. I was the whole time, like I was just like, I don't know what to do. I was like eating at the dining hall at the school every day. I was like, I refuse to eat out. I don't have the money for it. Like I wasn't making money anywhere. And like in college I worked at a bar the whole time, and there was like no bar that would hire me out here because like people out here are like professional bartenders, you know. It's like, it's not like people just slinging drinks. It's like, oh no, this is my living. So I was like, dang. So that was my backup plan for work, and I couldn't get that. So I was really just like scrounging. Luckily, like my mom and dad, who like I wasn't super close with, would like send me money here and there because they knew I was struggling. But like it was weird. Like we didn't really talk about it. It was just kind of like, "Are you okay?" And I'd be like, "Yes," or "Not really," you know. And then that's sort of how it went. And yeah, it was weird. I mean, it took a little bit to get used to, but honestly, like California felt like Florida in a way. Like obviously there's mountains, so that's different, and it's dry, but it was like it was warm, and like the vibe was kind of similar. So I didn't feel super out of place, which is I think why I ended up staying here. But it was definitely like, oh man, like the first 3 months was the internship, and then the 4 months after that was just like I got lucky that a friend of mine I went to college with, parents were like, hey, we have like a little pool house that you could just live in until you get off your feet, which was like the luckiest break because I don't know where I would have been if I didn't have that lucky break. So I lived there for like a year, and like for the first 6 months I was living there, I was just PAing. But that was even stressful because like PAing jobs, like you do them, but you don't really get paid for like 2 to 3 weeks. And sometimes when it's non-union, you won't get paid for like a month and a half. So I was like really stressing. I was just like front loading as much as I could, just showing face everywhere, being like, yo, I'm down, I'll do whatever, like I don't care, like if this is what it takes, like this is what it takes. And I just like hustled and hustled and hustled like crazy. And yeah, I was so lucky that Funny or Die was like nice enough to like even listen to me when I was like, hey, I have an idea, like, hey, I want to pitch you guys something. But even then it was still a lot of hustling.
Yeah, and so like when did you feel like the hustling was like paying off? Because you had a manager, you're sort of shopping around the script. So like, what do you think was the next tier that you were able to get on?
Oh my god, I don't know what everybody else tells you, but I feel like the hustling never stops, man. There's never a time that it stops. I think like, I mean, I got my managers and agents, and that Comedy Central thing came through, but for like a year or two after, probably like 2 years, I wasn't really booking anything. Like I was doing a lot of auditions, but I wasn't really getting anything. And then like at some point 2 years ago, I got like my first pilot, which was cool. And I was in it, and I had maybe like 2 lines, but it didn't even, and it was like going to be a reoccurring thing, but the pilot never made it past pilot, which is obviously like, it happens. I was sad about it, but I'm also like, I wasn't a big name or anything. And during that whole time, like I knew that like I wasn't really booking things because like I have a weird look where I don't look like I'm young, but I also don't look like I'm old. So like there's not a lot of roles for me. And on top of that, there's like this weird thing with the industry that's always bugged me when like they ask for like a Latino person, like a Latino like person in their script. It's always like a specific type of Latino they're looking for, but they won't ever say it. You know what I mean? But it's like so obvious, and it's like, oh, this feels like so weirdly racist in a way. Where they're like,
yeah, the example is the most racist that you can think of, but they're not going to say it out loud. They'll cast it and put it on TV, but they won't say it.
Exactly. And so like I would always get put out, and like to some extent I would always get put out for these things and be like, yo, if anybody even looked at me, they would know that this is not me. Like it's like I could be the best actor in the world, and this is like not like, I would feel uncomfortable putting on like an accent that isn't Puerto Rican, you know what I mean? Like I would feel uncomfortable like faking my way through a Mexican accent because I'm not Mexican, and I don't know what that, I don't know what that culture is. I mean, to the extent that someone who is from there would know. And I definitely don't want to like put on an accent and disrespect a bunch of people, or like, like So a lot of these times I'd be like, I know what you're going for, and I'm just not going to audition for this because, like, even if I book it, like, let's say best case scenario, I book it, I don't want to be that guy that everybody's like, yo, fuck that guy. You know, it's like, you don't want to be that person. And it's like, I don't want, it's like wrong on so many levels. Like, there's so many levels that it's like, and I would never, just to be clear, I would have never auditioned to do this. I've turned down a lot of stuff where I'm like, yo, this is like very clear cut, like not something I would ever feel comfortable doing. And nobody that is not this culture should feel comfortable, you know, like there's a lot of that. And it's unfortunate.
How did you get staffed on like your first TV job?
Yeah. Okay. So for the first 2 years I was out here, I was auditioning and writing, and I turned Illegal Alien into a pilot, and that was getting shopped around. I had a lot of meetings. And I was doing my own live show. Comedy Central let me use their performance space to do my own live show called Tele, which was specifically about the like, it was kind of sort of taking like the culture I grew up in, which is like Latino television that was like very, very specific to like the Latinx community or like the Latino community, that was like telenovelas and game shows and things that were like not normally viewed by the general public, essentially. And then taking this and like sort of mixing it with your average American television genres, like reality TV, like scripted narratives, like Food Network shows, anything I could get. And I'd have these like weird hybrids. And it was also a character showcase for me. So it was like 11 different channels, which were 11 different hybrid shows. And I played a character in every single one of them. And the whole idea was that this like sort of Latino cable man was trying to get people to sort of understand the culture better. So he'd like trap them in his like magical cable box, and these people would be characters in the shows that I had created. And it was like really crazy and sort of mystical and really fun. And I did that for like 2 years while I was trying to get staffed on things, and nobody wanted to staff me. And then my manager brought some agents, and the agents were like, yo, you can do a lot of characters. This is sick. You're a good actor. We'll rep you. And I was like, dang, okay. And so I did that. But then again, I still didn't book anything for like a year. And then, like, funnily enough, dude, Illegal Alien got to NBC somehow. And someone at NBC was like, yo, like, we want to meet with you about staffing for Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And I was like, oh my God, I love that show. And this is like a later season. I was like, I would love to. I come in and I was like, okay, what's the deal? How do I get this job? You know, I was like, and I met with like these two people. It's been so long. It's been like 4.5 years since I met with them. And I met with these two women, and they were like, hey, like, you know, we're staffing. We really like your sample. We think it's really good. You should even try shopping as a show. And I was like, let me tell you, I have. Nobody wants it. And they were like, okay, well, like, you know, there's this opportunity available, and you know, you seem like a really nice guy. It seems like this would be a good, cool opportunity. And like, I know they were like, we know you're green. Like, we know you're like, haven't written on a show before, but we think this could be great for you. And then they were like, we'll let you know after like Thanksgiving. And this was like 2019, no, 2018 Thanksgiving. And I was like, cool, I'm going to find out on Thanksgiving if I got it. And then the next week was Thanksgiving, and I was at my girlfriend's house. I'm telling you, man, my life is very wild. So I'm sitting there and I'm like grabbing a second plate, and all of a sudden I just like lose feeling in my right leg. And I was like, what is going on? And I like could not walk, and I was like started drenched in sweat, like so much pain. And then I like lose feeling in my other leg, and my girlfriend's aunt's like, oh, you probably pinched a nerve, just go lay down. And I was like, I don't know, like I feel really cold, but I'm sweating a lot. This feels really wrong, like something's off. And like for that week I was like going to chiropractors, acupuncturists, like urgent care, everything. Nobody could figure out what's going on. Everybody thought I pinched a nerve. And then finally I went to a hospital, and I was like, look, I do not feel good. I think something is really wrong. And they like took a bunch of blood cultures, didn't say anything to me. 3 days go by, and they're like, you need to come to the hospital right now. You have staph infection in your bloodstream. And I was like, what? And I had like bacteria had accumulated in my blood from something. They couldn't figure it out. And the whole time I can't walk at all. So I've been like up all night. I can't lay down because my hips are like, anytime I put pressure on anything lower than my hips are lower, I was in like the most pain I've ever felt in my life. Like, I don't even wish that on like the worst person in the world. You know what I mean? Like, it was the most terrible situation of my life. And so I go to the hospital. They think it's like meningitis. They like they tested everything, man. They put a camera down my throat to check my heart. They like took spinal taps. They did, I don't know how many brain scans, and it ended. And obviously I did not get the job because I had to tell my agents and managers, hey, I'm in the hospital and I have no idea what's going on. So I was in the urgent care for like 3 weeks, and they finally found out that I had like, this is crazy. There's a little tiny little bone in the centermost part of your hips called the sacroiliac joint. It's really, really tiny. And my sacroiliac joint, for some weird reason, had created its own abscess that was full of staph infection and was eating away at my bones and like infecting my body. And so they didn't know what to do. They like, I had like they basically sent me home on like what I thought was hospice. They basically sent me home with a thing in my arm that went into my heart, like an IV line that went into my heart, and I would have to clean it every day, flush it every day, inject antibiotics every morning, lunch, and dinner every single day for months. And then around January or February or something, they were like, okay, you're good. And I was like, I don't think so. I still feel really sick. And I went back to the hospital and found out that like this hospital in Burbank had like totally messed up and were like treating me incorrectly. And so it all came back. And then I got transferred to Cedars-Sinai, and this was like an episode of House. This like dude comes in and is like, hey, I'm a naval surgeon. I'm in town for like a month and a half. I think I know what this might be. By the way, they didn't know it was the sacroiliac joint abscess thing. This guy figured out later. They just thought I had an infection in my bones. This guy goes, I think I know what this is. I've only ever seen this twice before, but if it's what I think it is, he has an infection in this little bone, and I know the surgery to get in there and do it. And this whole time, dude, for these months, I'm like loopy as hell. Like they have pumped me with so much pain meds. I don't know who is who and what is happening. So I'm just like, I was like, he's gonna fix this. Let's do it, guys. And I remember specifically him being like, yo, this procedure. So there's a weird when a procedure is like, it's a low possibility of it being successful and a high possibility of it being successful. And I thought he said it was a low possibility, and I thought he said high. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be chill. He's got this in the bag. And he comes in with a marker, starts marking up my hips, my stomach, all this crazy stuff. I was like, oh shit, dude, I'm gonna get sliced up, dude. And I like didn't know what's going on. And I go into surgery the next day, and like it was wild. Like I go into surgery the next day, and I come out, and I like have this scar from like basically like an inch or two from the right of my belly button all the way to my back. It looks like a shark bite. And he was like, I don't know how, but like we were successful. It was like a 20% probability. We didn't hit your like femoral artery or any of these things. He like listed off a bunch of things, like one of your like main nervous, like central nervous system points. He was like listing off all these things. He's like, we basically lifted the muscle off your hip bone, got a camera in there, and like went in and did it all. So you should be fine. But then the scary part was like, he's like, but I don't know if it'll come back. And I was like, what? So like to this day, I'm still scared and I still have nightmares about it. But he did fix it. And I was supposed to be in a wheelchair for like 6 months or something crazy like that. And like after a month and a half, I was on a walker. And after another month and a half, I was on a cane. And after a month, I was walking again, but like limping sort of. And then like after 3 or 4 weeks of that, I was like running, which was crazy. And like the minute I got off my cane, I auditioned for a UCB comedy like characters team, and I got on it. And I was like, this is what I'm doing. And I did that. And I finished that term. It was about 6 months. And then this is like during when the writers sort of not strike, but there was like a writers thing going on where like everybody was firing agents, and like you couldn't have an agent. So I didn't have I technically didn't have any agents at all. I was just like chilling. And then someone from that NBC call goes, hey, like, we hope you're healthy. There's this, person on an overall deal, Tracy Wigfield, who is the coolest boss in the world. So Tracy meets with me, and this is where it gets. I swear, man. Every time I tell this story, people are like, "What is wrong with you? You're gonna die." The week before I'm supposed to meet with Tracy, I get appendicitis, so I have to get my appendix removed like on a Monday, and then I had to meet with her on a Tuesday. But I didn't want to be like the sick guy. I didn't want to come in there and be like, oh, so I didn't cancel the meeting. I went, and they were like, you'll be out the same day from appendix surgery. So I go in, and at night I'm like, I'm good. I can pee. Like they have to check to make sure you can like pee and all this stuff. And I was like, I promise you I can pee. Let me go. So they let me out that night. And the next day I'm like on pain meds, like limping through this office at NBC. I've never been here in my life. I'm on this lot walking into this lady's office, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, I honestly was on pain meds and like some other antibiotic. Like my brain was so fuzzy. Like it felt like I was on Dayquil from all these meds that they'd given me for the pain. And she's talking to me, and I swear to God, I don't remember what we talked about for like 40 minutes. And like, I know some stuff, like for example, like what the show was about, like the Saved by the Bell was about these, like, it's essentially like if a school in a low income area closes down and gets busted into like Palisades High, right? And so you have 3 kids from Palisades High who are rich and have never had any issues, and 3 kids who come from like low income families, which is what my family was, who are just on scholarship or not on scholarship, but there to like use these facilities, use whatever they can to like get ahead in life, and like these are opportunities they never would have had otherwise. Like that's what I was like. My brother got into that private school because he was a brainiac and like passed their entrance exam, which was in and of itself weird. Me and my sister just rode his coattails because like we're smart, but we're not my brother's smart, so we like got in. Then we were a low income family that was on full scholarship, and we had to like outperform people to stay on scholarship, which was like a weird situation. And that's like kind of what these kids, like the situation these kids were in, where it was like, I need to be the best of the best. Like I need to prove myself here because now I'm in a situation that could be very beneficial for my life. And it was like talking about these weird things of like, income disparity, of like what that means when like I know like when I was in high school, I was like, man, you could wear whatever you want. I was so broke. I didn't have the money for like nice clothes. So I was re-wearing stuff, and I would get ragged on about that all the time. And I'd get ragged on about like not having like a cool haircut. Like I'd get ragged on about anything that I couldn't control. I would get ragged on. And that's like so much of these experiences that I had as a child. I'm like sort of going through the experience of like not having parents for like a specific amount of time, living with my grandma, all these different things that happen, really tailored to the show in a way that like really matched. And like I was like 24 at the time or 25 at the time, so I was like, there's no way I'll get this job, I'm too young. And like 2 days later they're like, hey, you get the job, like, are you excited? And I was like, oh shit. And like fast forward to like getting this job, was so funny because I remember being like, Tracy, I didn't want to tell you in the room in the meeting, but like I had just gotten my appendix out the day before. And she was like, that's what that was? I thought you were just like walking cool. I thought you were like, you had a cool walk. And I was like, bro, I was like trying not to show any pain. So I was like kind of like walking like, I don't know how to explain it. Like I was just like, I had like a strut in my step. And she was like, oh, I guess it's just like a cool walk, And I was like, no, dude, I was in a lot of pain and I was trying not to show you. So it was really, really funny. My first season, obviously growing pains, like I didn't know what a room was. I didn't like all these people like my first 2 weeks I was throwing ideas out like nobody's business. And then I started to realize all these people were like adults that have written on like Community and 30 Rock and like shows that I grew up loving. You know what I mean? Like some of them were still writing on The Good Place. And I was like, dang, I need to shut up. These people are smarter than me, So I was like, the first 2 weeks, I was like, everybody was like, dang, this kid is gunning for this. And then like after that, I was like, shut up for like the next 6 weeks. So I was like, oh yeah, I have a good joke. Like I was like so quiet because I was just like taking it in. But also I was like, I mean, I'm a person that loves to ask questions and learn. So I was asking them everything. I was like, what was Community like? What was like working with Donald Glover? What was 30 Rock like? Like, well, how did it work? Like, who pitched what? Like, do you pitch a whole story? Do you pitch little lines? Like, I didn't know anything about anything. And like, I remember the first meeting we went into, I tried to pitch an entire episode, like all 3 story arcs. And they were like, relax, just pitch things you like. Don't pitch a whole ABC story. Like, I was like, here's the A story, here's the B story, here's the C story. And they're like, no, we don't do that here. You don't pitch a whole episode. It was a learning process, but like, dude, let me tell you, it was like one of the greatest experiences of my life. I've never learned more than in that room. And like, it was tricky because we was a 20-week room, and like literally the week we ended, the next week COVID happened. So like I didn't get to be on set for my episode, which is a heartbreaker. But also like it was just a weird, surreal experience because like things got stopped filming. We didn't know if we were gonna even have a set. Like it was just very scary situation. And I mean, we were gonna be on Peacock, which was like wasn't even announced yet, so there's like a lot of things that it was like one of the most stressful situations, but also one of the greatest situations I've ever been in. And I'm so thankful. And I don't know if Tracy's gonna ever listen to this, but I don't know what she listens to, if she listens to podcasts or what, because like, but if she ever does, man, she is the greatest person. She's for giving me a chance and for doing everything. I'm like so freaking grateful to her. She's the freaking best. And I wouldn't be anywhere doing anything if it weren't for her. I got really lucky.
Yeah, and then I saw, that you were on set for the second season. So what was that experience? So like,
I was, yeah. So second season, they added Victoria, who is Gonzalez, which everybody joked we were like the married couple because we actually became really, really good friends early on. And they were like, "So you for sure don't know each other?" And we're like, "No, we just hit it off the bat." And it was nice to have another Latinx writer in the room, and we just like, I mean, there was so much like overlap that we had about our lives, like so many things that like I thought was so like unique to myself that like she also experienced, and vice versa. And like that's sort of how, I mean, I can give you sort of a very like the like like a very brief synopsis of what the episode is, because like I said before, I can't really talk about it because I don't think it's going to come out by the time this podcast comes out. But it is about like, as Latinx kids growing up and going to school, like my mom pressured me into taking Spanish classes because I couldn't write in Spanish. I could read it and speak it perfectly fine, but I could not write in it. And that was something she wanted me to learn. So I could be like a full, fully immersed in Spanish. I could do it all. But these Spanish classes, are like predominantly taught by, for some reason, by like white graduate students or like someone's parent who happens to be white. And so you get this like sort of weird, like you're taught your language by someone who's not your culture, but also they're telling you your language is wrong because what you learn in a book is Spain Spanish,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, the 20 some odd countries that speak Spanish. So it's sort of based around that idea. And I can't delve into it much more, but it is that sort of concept is like, what is going on here? Like, why is this allowed? So that's sort of what we touched on, and being on set was amazing. I mean, granted, there's still a lot of COVID restrictions. Like, we have to get tested every other day, and you have to wear these very specific masks, and I had to present my vaccination card for the sake of like comfortability between people. And it's like a lot of different things that like are totally fair. I totally get it. I'm vaccinated. I understand it. Everybody should be vaccinated. Sorry if you want to fight me about it. But yeah, it's odd. That was my first on-set experience for a show, so it's like obviously like weird and kind of a bummer that it's like so restricted and strange. But like we have two amazing actresses with Heskidi and Alicia. They're like so freaking talented and like 100% on the come up. Like I love those girls to death. They're literally like family. I like will support them throughout their entire lives. I hope they become amazing stars. They're sweetest and they're so receptive. And me and Victoria talked to the both of them so often during this process, and like how excited they were to be able to tell stories that are Latinx because it's rare. And like we have a show very luckily that has two Latinx leads, not just two Latinx leads, one who's Afro Latina also. And I was about to say también, I was about to start speaking Spanish, who's also Afro Latina. And it's like, man, these are stories that like don't get told, like very rarely get told. And we want to be a place where we can tell these, and that's what we tried to do as much as we could. And I'm very thankful that we were allowed to, and very thankful that this is like a place to do that. Not allowed to. They were totally supportive. I don't know why I'm saying that. They weren't like, no, they were super supportive. I'm just very thankful to have the opportunity is sort of what I mean, to be even able to tell these stories because they're rare.
Yeah, and so I'm curious about your own writing. What are some of the themes? And sometimes as writers, we're trying to like work out something. So like, what do you always see that's the through lines in your storytelling?
I'm very character centric. I love writing character first. And a lot of these characters, like, I mean, I was always told, especially like I did groundlings in UCB for performance and things. I was always told like, yo, when you create a character, think about your life, think about like people and like my family is Puerto Rican, but we've also married into, like, my mom has 4 brothers and sisters, but then my grandma got remarried after my grandfather passed, and that guy that she married, my Abu King, he also had like 5 or 6 kids, so there's like 11 of them. And like, they're all Puerto Rican, but they've married into very different families. Like we have Cuban, Venezuelan, Colombian family. So it's all across the board, and everybody has different stories, and everybody speaks very differently and has a very different like cadence to the way they are. And so I pull from all these different family members. And so kind of how I structure things is like, I'll focus in on like one family member, and it always tends to be my grandpa's because I love my grandpas so much, and like I was raised by them because my parents worked so often. So like a lot of the stories I write end up being like grandson grandfather dynamics, things like that are really cute, or like my grandmother Avita, who's the sweetest woman in the world. She's like the backbone of the family. I love to try to incorporate her in anything I can. But I mean, all my projects, like Illegal Alien, initially was sort of I wanted to talk about. I talk about topics that are going on in the world because my background's sort of journalism. So like Illegal Alien was like, I wanted to focus on immigration. I wanted to talk about immigration in a way that wasn't so heavy handed. Like there's a lot of stuff that comes out that's like very much like on the nose. And I was like, okay, well, what's a way to do this and like be able to talk about it through like satire and stuff. And that's sort of what that came to be. And then I have another pilot that I'm working on now called Noticias, which is sort of built around that Jorge Ortiz character. And that's sort of the idea of like, it's a culture clash. So it's like, a big Puerto Rican family moves to Montana, but it's also the idea of like island fame, which is a very interesting thing that I feel like is unique to Puerto Rico, where like, when I go to Puerto Rico, there are people that my mom is like, oh, you don't know this lady and this guy and this. And I'm like, no, because they only are famous in Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico has its own TV, its own everything, radio. It's like their own celebrities. And it's like, you would never know who these people are unless you lived on the island. And that's something that I felt so unique to Puerto Rico. And I was like, dang, I want to talk about that. That's so interesting that like you can be island famous but nobody knows who you are outside of that. And so that's sort of what I played with that. Then Los Blancos, which is the pilot I'm writing with my brother that we've been pitching out, which is really fun, is about a white-facing Latino family that live in Miami that are conservative. And this is sort of a play, and I'm not taking a jab at my family, but I do have family that are like white-facing Cuban Americans who live in Miami who are hyper-conservative and voted for Trump. And I'm sure like there are Latinos that vote for Trump, and it's very odd. And it's something that we tried to dissect with them for so long, and there was definitely times where we like didn't talk. It got really tense, but we wanted to talk about sort of like why, for some reason, every time the election cycle comes around, Florida goes Republican, and it's always tends to be this like huge pocket of people down in Miami that are like tend to be very wealthy who want to preserve their wealth, and that's like this weird thing. And so we created this family called Los Blancos, which I thought was really funny. The last name was Blancos. The idea, it was sort of structured around our family. It was like the dad, the father, the three kids, and the grandmother all living together in this house. And the dad had inherited this like resort from his father, and the dad just totally ran it to the ground. Like the kid's dad, they're a total spineless asshole. He's losing the resort. The only thing that like really gives them like their social capital, and they're like, and the wife is sort of the backbone, which is like more based around my mother, who like really holds everything together. And then you have the three kids, who the older brother is like this closeted semi-politician who runs their philanthropic organization. The middle brother, who's like more of like a weird sentimental like Drake meets Bad Bunny kind of guy who thinks he's good at music but he's terrible. And then the younger sister, who is more of like a YouTube personality, like a Lele Pons type. And all three of them are like very problematic because they've always been raised in wealth and don't really know anything about their culture. And then the grandma, who's Abita, who's just very hard-nosed, like hard-headed, and like lives with them, but like always complains about how they're like squandering their wealth and all that, which is very much, a fun dynamic. And the whole pilot was revolved around like how they're losing the hotel chain and how a Congress seat has opened up in Florida, and the mom wants the father to run for it. And so it's like getting all these kids from their lives, bringing them back to the house, getting them ready because there's going to be an announcement, but also making sure they don't do anything stupid and getting them in trouble. And so that's what that's based around. And we had laid out like 3 seasons. We're still pitching it around, but I'm really excited about it because it's like such an interesting world to dive into because nobody ever wants to, but it's so real and bizarre. And then I'm also, I pitch I'm really into animated shows as well. So I'm on like my second animated show I've been pitching out. But those, I mean, I'll give you just a vague idea. Is like a lot of them. The first one was mostly based around folktale creatures and like this different world where like things like the chupacabra or el cuco, all these different like folktales existed, and sort of like these kids and their grandparents were trying to find a way to like matriculate these creatures into society so they didn't feel like they were like outcasted. And that one's sort of on the back burner right now. And then I had another one where I'm just throwing. I have a lot. I read a lot of stuff, so I'm sorry if it sounds like word vomit. But I also had one where it was like my family, my mom's side, we found out is descendants of a very famous pirate, El Pirata Cofresi, who was like people called the Puerto Rican Robin Hood because he would like loot Spanish merchant ships and like give all this money and stuff, like all the money and gold and all that to the people of Puerto Rico. So I was like trying to find a way to like take that sort of pirate fun like older like Robin Hood culture and turn it into something sort of animated that's more like modern day and what it would look like. So I'm working on that. And then finally I'm writing a feature currently right now called Folklorico that is about, sort of loosely based on me, about a kid who was raised in the States who like knew about his culture but wasn't really immersed in it and wanted to know more. And so the whole idea is that he like leaves his house in New York after getting fired from his job and uses his severance to go to Puerto Rico during the festivals of San Sebastian, which is like a big festival that they do in Puerto Rico, to sort of like, he's like, okay, this is like the big cultural like event of the year. Maybe I'll learn something about myself. And ends up like blacking out and waking up in the forest in the middle of El Yunque in this like little hut with this like sort of bushman who's like sort of like old Tarzan sort of standing over him. And the whole thing is like you find out it's his grandfather, and that his grandfather has been living in the woods and living the folktale of the chupacabra his entire life. He's been going to farms at night and like draining the goats of their blood and like hurrying back to his little hut because he thinks the only way to keep the culture alive in Puerto Rico is by keeping the folktales alive by word of mouth. So he's actively being the chupacabra because he thinks that's the only way like Puerto Rico won't become Americanized. And obviously it's like it's very outlandish, and it's sort of a buddy comedy, and it's cute. I'm really excited about it. It's very out there. It's like very like Hunt for the Wilder People, if you've ever seen it. Like very odd pairing. So I'm really excited about that. But everything I write about is like very like It's funny because we focus so much. I focus so much on Puerto Rico because I think there's so much about Puerto Rico that's just like left without ever being explained, and like people always consider it like just like an afterthought. Like it's just part of the U.S. and like even Latino culture is so interesting because like we're the most. People always like joke that we're like the most bastardized Latinx country because we're like part of the U.S. And so I always want to be able to talk about it in whatever way I can, and like that movie, for example, like I have like every shot pretty much, except for like the first 20 minutes is like shot in Puerto Rico in specific places that I know. And all the music in it goes back from like the 1960s to like modern day Puerto Rican artists only, like El Gran Combo de Puerto Rico, all the way to like Bad Bunny. You know what I mean? Like I really did my research and I was like, I need to find music that fits every single thing. Like I want to make sure all the music fits the festival. Like it all has to make sense. And I really like, man, I took like 6 months of the pandemic writing that first draft of that. And now I have to redo it because it wasn't that great. But I mean, I've researched like a mother, man.
See, this is what I love about Puerto Ricans because they love Puerto Rico so much. Like,
oh yeah, dude, 100%. I'm like, I'm so lucky to be Puerto Rican, man. I love that place. Like it's like a hidden gem. Like nobody ever thinks about it for some reason, but man, is it like one of the coolest, like most beautiful, most like home feeling places in the world.
so I like to ask my guests who are the writers that they're a fan of. So these could be heroes of yours, peers, people you creep on social media, just whoever's work you're living right now.
And is it specifically writers or just people in general, or like? Because like I'm really into like Marvin Lemus, like Gente Fight. I love it. I think it's really cool. I love Gloria Calderon Calet. I loved One Day at a Time. Like I was obsessed with it. I was like for sure on Twitter being like, yo, if y'all don't renew this, I'm gonna scream. But I'm also like I'm really into weird stuff, which I don't think I covered as much. But like, yeah, I covered these cool like big topics, but I'm also like very much into the weird like obscure. So I really like Julio Torres and Ana Fabrega. Like I really like what they're doing with the spookies. Like that's so cool. And I love like the bilingual nature of it as well. Like I think that should be incorporated way more. I love that. And then also people like Oz Rodriguez. Like I really like Oz. I've been such a fan of him, and like every little stop I've had in my life, like from Funny or Die to this production company I worked at called Caviar to now NBC, he's always been there. So it's I've always like been like hovering around his planet, you know, like I'm just like circulating around it. I'm like, dude, this guy's so talented and someone I've always wanted to meet. So all those people, very, very talented. And there's so many more, but those just happen to be the ones off the top of my head that I like, man, I'm like, dang, they're really doing cool stuff. I'm like really, really happy for them.
And so where can people follow you on social media?
All my handles don't match anymore. It used to all be Polos Marcos because that was like a nickname of like, they're like Marco Polo, Polos Marcos. So my Instagram is now Marcos Jean Gonzalez because my real name is Jan Marcos Gonzalez, but that was taken. So now it's Marcos Jan Gonzalez, which is annoying. So, and then that's on Instagram. Then Twitter, I'm still Polos Marcos. Because if I change it, apparently it destroys something. Like they're like, you can't change this for whatever reason. So I was like, all right. And that's pretty much where I'm at. I will let you know I'm terrible at Twitter, and I very rarely post on Instagram. But I do post Instagram stories a lot because I get bored. So if you ever want to see that, and definitely check out Saved by the Bell. I got to shout out Saved by the Bell. I'm like really happy with the stuff they're doing there, and I'm so proud and happy to be part of it. And also, I didn't even shout out this writer, Victoria Gonzalez is awesome. I love her. I met her for the first time. She is the sweetest person in the world. She's so freaking talented and funny, and I'm so lucky to have met her this year. Like one of the best. If I had to give like my top 3 highlights of the pandemic, she is like number 1. I'm so happy we met. She is the greatest.
No, she's so great. All the success that's coming her way, it's totally deserved. Like, I'm so happy for her and everything she's doing.
Yeah, she's killing it. She's, I'm so lucky to be homies with her. I think we're literally getting food tomorrow. We've been doing this thing where we bounce around LA trying to find like the closest thing to good like Puerto Rican food because it's rare. It's rare. There's a lot of Cuban food, but Puerto Rican food is rare. There's a good place in North Hollywood called Mofongos. But for the most part, like the Tripleta truck is pretty good. And there used to be a Rican's food truck, but I have not seen it in a long time. So I don't know where he went. But Puerto Rican food, man, so rare over here. So it's literally everywhere in Florida. You turn any corner, there's Puerto Rican food. Here, it's so hard to find.
And so I like to have my guests help me title the episode.
Oh my God.
The prompt is a blank Latinx writer. In that blank, you can put as many words as you want. You can mix them all around, just whatever feels true to you, this conversation. I also use it as a community building tool. So when someone sees your title, they can be like, oh, that's like me. I should check this person out. I should follow them. I should listen to this.
Oh, you're gonna okay. Well, I wonder if anybody is like this, but I mean, if you know me at all, I love using adjectives, and I'm a weirdo. I love being like, "Ooh, that stinks like a skunk." Like I'm just like goofy. Like I just say random things. So I remember Victoria asking me this last week, and I was on a rant of being like, "That's like, you know that I think you should leave sketch where Ruben Horazo's like stinky." I always say that I'm a stinky little wild card Boricua writer, Latinx writer. It's a mouthful. But if the people that if there are people out there that message you and go, I'm that too, send them to me because we are rare. There's not many of us. But if you see one in the wild, tell them to call me. We'll be homies.
Perfect. And with that, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was such a wild, weird, fun conversation. And again, thanks so much for doing it.
Yeah, man. I thank you so much. This has been so cool. I've had a very, I never really, I guess I've never really talked about my life to this extent. So this has been very interesting. I hope people are like, what?